Welcome in. Take a moment and just arrive. Wherever you are right now, however you're lying, let this be the place you stop. You don't have to do anything else tonight. There's nowhere else to be. Whatever you've been carrying today, the weight of it, the noise of it, you can set it down now. None of it needs to follow you into the dark. And whatever you didn't finish today, it will still be there in the morning. You don't need to hold it any longer. So let's begin to slow everything down. Together. Let your mouth close, soft, and breathe in through your nose, gently, and let it go, slow, like a sigh. There's no rhythm to chase. Just let the breath out take a little longer than the breath in. Breathe in, and let it fall away. And again, in and out, slower still. Now, one deeper one. Take in a breath, and then just a little more on top. And now, let it all go. Good. Let the next breath find its own way now. It knows what to do. And as the breathing settles, let your body begin to follow. Let your jaw unclench. Let your teeth come apart just slightly. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let them be heavy. Let your hands open, or just rest, however they fall. Let your belly soften with every breath out. Nothing held in. Let your legs grow heavy, heavier than they've been all day. And your feet, let them be still and warm. And right here, in the center of your chest, let there be a little warmth, a loosening, as though something you'd been bracing against is finally letting go. You're not waiting for anything now. You're just here, in the low light, at the edge of sleep. Tonight we have a story from Agatha, a story she has held for a very long time. There are things that happen in a life, things witnessed, things survived, things that never quite let go, that can't be spoken of easily, not with the people who knew the people involved. But some stories need a witness. Some things need to be said before it's too late to say them. And it's easier sometimes to give a story to a stranger in the dark than to anyone she has ever known or loved. Because you won't look at her differently in the morning. Because the dark makes certain truths easier to speak out loud. This is one of those stories. It's filled with things that don't fully explain themselves, with questions that were never answered, and silences that were never broken. Some of it will stay with you. That is the nature of these things. But tonight, it finally gets told. This is the ground never settled. Before we sleep.
There is a churchyard I want to set you down beside in the cool of an October afternoon, because that is where this story keeps its center. And the best way into a thing like this is to start at the center and feel outward, the way you feel out a dark room from the one piece of furniture your hand can find. So, stand with me at the edge of it. A small country churchyard in Kentucky, the leaves coming down, the light gone thin and yellow the way it does in the third week of October, a low wall of pale stone along the back, a grave open at the foot of it. In the cold, poor corner where the ground is worst, a family gathered at the lip of that grave in their good dark clothes, tired, having driven a long way, holding the small flowers people hold at a graveside because the hands need something to do, and a minister, an old man, kind, leading them gently through the words, and off to the side, not part of it, standing by a row of cardboard boxes with her coat buttoned to the throat, a woman watching. That woman is me. I am younger there than I am now, in this chair, but not young. And I am the only soul in that yard, the only soul in that whole town I had come to believe. Who knows what that grave is, and what is truly being done at it, and what week of the year it is, and why the week is the worst part of all. I am going to leave us there a while. The family at the lip of the grave, the old minister with his book, the leaves coming down. I am going to step back out of that afternoon and tell you the whole long way I came to be standing in it, knowing what I knew, because the knowing is the story, and that family with their flowers and their grief is only the last line of it. When I have told you all of it, I will bring us back to the yard, and we will watch them finish, and then you can sleep, and I will keep it again. That is what I do here in this chair. I hold things and hand them over for the length of one telling, and take them back. You do not have to do anything with this one. Only come with me as far as the graveside, and then let it go. So, it began with a winter. I was younger then, though not young, and I was between the kind of lives a person sometimes finds themselves between, where the old one has closed its door very quietly behind you, and the new one has not yet shown you where its door is. I will not bore you with the why of it. There was a death, and a house I could no longer stand to be in, and a little money that would last if I was careful, and a way with paper. That last part is what matters. I had always had a way with paper. I could look at a drawer full of somebody's leavings, receipts and letters and deeds to land long gone to other hands, and see the order that wanted to come out of it. It is a small gift, and the world does not pay much for it, but a small town will sometimes pay a little, and that is how I came to take the work. The town was in Kentucky, down where the land goes, to low green hills, and the creeks run over flat shelves of stone, and where, if you dig even a little, you come to limestone, pale and cold and full of the shapes of old sea things from a time before there was anyone to be buried in it. The stone matters later. Everything in that town was built either of it or against it. The courthouse, the bridge, the foundations of the old houses, the low wall around the churchyard, all of it the same pale rock quarried close by, so the whole town seemed to have grown up out of the ground like a tooth. There was a monument on the courthouse square, and I will tell you about it now, though I did not truly look at it until much later, because that is the whole point of such a thing. It is put up so that you will stop seeing it. A square shaft of the pale local stone inside a little iron fence on the green before the courthouse, older than anyone living. It said, in letters worn shallow by 100 winters, the word founded, and a year and a handful of names, the men who had made the town. I walked past it twice a day and never read it, the way you walk past the war memorial in your own square without reading the names, because a monument is not for reading. It is for having been read once long ago by somebody who is dead now, so the rest of us never have to. Hold on to the fact that there was a year carved on it. For that winter, it was only a gray shape on the green that I did not see, along with a great many things that town walked past every day of its life. The work was at the Historical Society, in a building that had been a bank. You could still tell if you knew how to look. A vault in the back, its great door propped open and its insides given to shelving. a marble counter worn into a trough where 2 generations of hands had pushed money across it. The serious ceilings banks used to build when they wanted you to feel your dollars were as safe in their keeping as a soul in the keeping of a careful God. The society had it for almost nothing when the bank failed, and had filled it the way a slow tide fills a low room with the donated and the bequeathed and the simply abandoned, until there was no order to any of it, and they needed somebody to make some. They needed me. I was glad to be needed that winter. I came to the work the way a cold person comes to a fire, and for a good while it warmed me exactly as I had hoped. I came in early while it was still dark because I have always liked a building before anyone else is in it. In at the side door with a key on a loop of dirty string, through the front room where the good donations stood behind glass, on with the one green-shaded lamp at the long table in the back, down to the boxes. A radiator under the window knocked and hissed, and never once made the room properly warm. So I worked in my coat with the cuffs turned back, my hands aching by mid-morning in the small bones. There was the smell of old paper, a smell both sweet and sad, dust and vanilla and the ghost of the glue that holds old bindings. There was the gray light coming up slow in the window, and the square going about its small business, a truck idling at the feed store, the woman opening the diner, sweeping her piece of sidewalk, the church bell a few streets over marking the hours, always a half-second behind the courthouse clock, as if the two could never agree what time it had gotten to be, and the work itself. Take a box, lay it out across the table, go through it one piece at a time, write each onto a card, the card to the long drawer, the piece to a clean numbered folder, the folder to its shelf. It is slow. People who have never done it think it tedious, and they are right, but it is the good kind of tedium, the kind that empties you and leaves room for nothing but the next small task. I have done many things in my life to keep from thinking, and the cataloging of a dead townspaper is among the best of them. By the end of the first month, I had cleared the front boxes, and the vault was coming into a true order, shelf by shelf. And in the evening, I could stand in its doorway and feel I had made one small corner of the world make sense, a feeling I would recommend to anyone if only it lasted. In the second month, I came to the church things. The church a few streets over was the oldest in the county, and when it repaired its roof, it had cleaned out an attic above the vestry, and much of what was up there had come to the society. Church paper is not like other paper. A family keeps the warm things and throws the cold ones away. The photographs, the love letters, kept. The tax bills let go. But a church keeps the cold things, because the cold things are its work. It keeps the registers. Who was born into its care? Who was married under its roof? Who was carried out feet first to the yard behind the wall? Marriages, baptisms, burials, the whole arithmetic of a congregation in long ledgers in the hands of whatever clerk or sexton or minister had the keeping of them in his year. There were a great many of these books, and I loved them. I will not pretend otherwise. Here was a hand from 1888, careful and upright, a schoolmaster's, recording the baptism of a child whose grandchildren were likely still in that town. Here was a hand from the first war years, hurried, thinned out, more burials than marriages, and the burials clustered close on the same handful of dates, which is the influenza writing itself into the record without once being named, because they did not yet have the word for what was killing them. You learn to read a town through its registers the way a doctor reads a body through its scars. I was, God help me, content. And then I came to the burial book. There were several, covering the long life of the churchyard between them, out of order, some water stained from the attic, one with its spine gone so the pages were held by a loop of cotton tape. My work was to put them in order and cross-reference them, so that anyone who came after a genealogist, a grandchild, the writer of one of those county histories nobody reads, could find a single soul among the thousands without doing what I was doing, which was reading all of it. So I read all of it. That is the only reason I found the thing. No one before me had ever read all of it. Not in one mind, not across one winter, not with a card going down for every line. The minister who kept the book in any given year read only the lines he wrote. The sexton dug only the graves of his own seasons. Each held a small piece, a few years, a single hand, and each did his piece honestly, and not one of them ever held the whole at once. It took an outsider with a way with paper and a winter to spend and nothing in her life she wanted to think about. It took me. A burial register is the plainest thing in the world. The date, the name, sometimes an age, sometimes a cause, sometimes a note about the family or the plot. And the fee, because a grave costs money, the digging and the keeping of the ground. And a church is a practical thing as well as a holy one. Date, name, age, fee, line after line, year after year, hand after hand, the long, slow harvest of a town going down into its limestone, a few souls at a time. I had worked the oldest book the better part of a week before I noticed the plot numbers. They ran in a narrow column at the right, and they were not in order. People do not die in the order of the ground they will lie in, but a churchyard is laid out in numbered sections, and as I catalogued, I came to know that yard almost as well as if I had walked it, though I had not. The old families lay in the high ground near the church, low numbered under the good stones, the middle ground filled in over the decades. In the far edge, against the low wall at the back, the cold end farthest from the church door, was a high-numbered section given over, as the back of every old churchyard is, to the poor, the unmarked, the county's dead, the ones a town buries because somebody must. And among those high-numbered plots, one number began to feel like a number I had written before. This is the part people get wrong when they tell a thing like this. They reach for the fright too soon. They want the cold hand on the neck right away. It did not come to me as a cold hand. It came as a small wrongness in my bookkeeping, which, if you have ever balanced an account, you will know is worse than any cold hand. Because a cold hand might be your imagination, but a column that will not add up is a plain fact, sitting on the page, refusing you. The number was the same. I went back through my cards. I keep my cards. I keep everything. It is the disease that makes me good at the work, and laid out every burial I had so far recorded in that one plot against the back wall. 4 of them spread across 30 years, 1891, 1908, 1922, and 1931, the most recent I had reached. 4 burials, far apart in time, all in the one square of ground. A plot can hold more than one, I knew that. The poor were buried close, and a single plot might take a husband and then, years on, his wife, or the several members of one hard-luck family, over a long time. That is ordinary. You nod, you make a note, you move on. So I made my note and would have moved on, except I looked again and saw what the names were. There were no names. The first, in 1891, was entered as a stranger. No name, no age, the fee marked paid, the payer not recorded. The second, 1908, was infant, no surname, fee paid, no payer named. The third, 1922, a man, the word was found, fee paid. The fourth, 1931, again only stranger, fee paid by a hand that signed nothing. 4 burials in one plot across 30 years, not one with a name, every fee paid by someone who did not care to be recorded as having paid it. I sat with that a while, the radiator knocking, the gray light, my cold hands flat on the table either side of the open book, I sat with it the way you sit with a sum you have done 3 times, and that comes out wrong 3 times, when you know the arithmetic is simple and you are not a fool, and still the number will not be the number it ought to be. And I did what a careful person does with a sum that will not balance. I decided I had not read enough of it. The answer would be further on in the years I had not reached. I had only to keep working, and the explanation would arrive in due course, plain and dull and a little disappointing, the way the influenza had arrived in the clustered dates of 1918 with no ghost in it at all. The town had a custom. Every town has its customs about its poor. I would find it written down somewhere, and that would be the end of it. I kept working. That is the thing to sit with before you sleep. I kept working, and the keeping working was the whole of it, because the book was patient, and I was patient, and between us we were going to get to the bottom of that ground, whether I wanted to or not. I went hunting forward through the other books for that one plot number, out of turn, which is not how I work. I am a first thing first person, but I could not leave the column unbalanced, and I found it again and again, a single repeated note running under a long piece of music once you have been told it is there. After 1931, an infant in 1939, no name. A man in 1946, the word this time not found but unknown. A stranger in 1953, and in 1958, a woman, no name, no age, fee paid, payer not recorded, the last entry in the last book, after which the register ended. The church having gone over to some newer system, the society did not have, and I never saw. From 1891 to 1958, 67 years. And in that one plot against the back wall laid out on my cards in a row, 9 burials. 9. Nameless, every one. The fee paid every time by no one. Then I saw the small thing, the thing I had not seen until the cards were in the row, and I was checking the dates to be sure of my count. Deaths come when they come. A year of burials is strewn at random. 1 in spring, 2 in the hard cold of January, 1 in the August heat when the old people go. These 9 were not strewn. Every one of them across 67 years, in 9 different decades, under the hands of I do not know how many ministers and sextons who never read one another's pages, every one had gone into the ground in the same week. The 3rd week of October, not the same day. I am not telling you they fell on one date. That would be a sillier story. Same week the leaves come down in that part of Kentucky, and the first true cold comes off the hills, and the light goes thin and yellow in the afternoons. 9 times across 67 years, a nameless stranger went into that plot in the 3rd week of October, and the fee was paid, and no one signed. I did not feel a cold hand even then. What I felt was what you feel when you have done arithmetic a long time and the column finally balances. Except what it balanced to was not an answer. It balanced to a shape. And a shape is worse than a wrong sum, because a wrong sum is a mistake, and a shape is a thing that someone made. The second of the 3 things turned that shape into something I could no longer call a custom. Among the church boxes was a map, a proper survey of the churchyard done by a county surveyor, his blind embossed seal pressed into the corner of the heavy paper, dated the autumn of 1961, 3 years after the last of the 9, when the church had decided to set its crowded old yard down on paper and know what ground it had left to give. A beautiful thing. Whoever he was, the surveyor had been careful and proud of his care. Every plot drawn to its true size and numbered, the consecrated ground marked off from the unconsecrated by a fine dotted line, the old stones noted, the empty plots noted, the ones still waiting to be sold. I found the back wall on it. I found the high-numbered paupers section. And where my one plot ought to be, where my 9 nameless strangers ought to lie 9 deep in the limestone of 9 Octobers, I found in the surveyor's fine hand an empty square. Not a plot marked occupied. Not a plot marked with 9 burials, which an honest survey of that ground would have had to show. An empty square just outside the dotted line of the holy ground, with its number and one word in the surveyor's small lettering. Unused. I sat back from the table. The radiator knocked. Out on the square, a truck door slammed, and a man called another man's name in the flat, friendly voice of a small town, and the church bell came in behind the courthouse clock, as it always did, and the light was the thin yellow light of an October afternoon, because it was the 3rd week of October when I found the survey, though I did not let myself think about that until later, much later, in another city, when I could afford to. 2 documents, both honest. There was no forgery, no trembling guilt in either hand, no sign anywhere that anyone had lied. The burial book was kept plainly and well by men doing plain work. The survey was made carefully and proudly by a man doing careful work. Each was true to itself, and they could not both be true to the world. One said 9 people lay in that square of ground. The other said the ground had never once been opened, that it lay outside the holy line, empty, waiting, unused, and the survey had been made 3 years after the last burial by a man standing in that very yard with his level and his chain, looking at that very square, writing that nothing was there. There is always an explanation. I told myself so all the way to the end, because the alternative was a thing I had no shelf to put away on. The surveyor missed it. The plots were renumbered. The book and the map used 2 systems, and I had crossed them wrong. I checked, and I am good at my work, and I checked again, and the numbers were the numbers, and the systems were the same system, and the plot in the book was the plot on the map, and the book said 9, and the map said none, and somewhere between the 2, in the cold of that old bank with my cuffs turned back, I began slowly to be afraid. The 3rd thing I found, because I went looking, and going looking was a decision, the only real one in this whole story that was mine and not the book's. I could have stopped. My work did not require me to reconcile the book to the map. The job was to cart it and shelve it and let it go. A more sensible person would have written the discrepancy in a dry line on a dry card. See plot, register at odds with 1961 survey, and moved on and slept fine. That road was open to me. I think it is open to most people, most of the time. The road where you write the plain dry thing and do not go looking. And I think the only difference between the people who sleep fine and the people who sit up in chairs years later telling it to strangers is that the second kind went looking. I went looking. I am the second kind, and if you are still awake, you may be too, and I am sorry for it. What I went looking for was the rubbings. The society had a collection of them, a great flat folder of the kind that holds maps and prints, and inside a few hundred sheets of soft paper, each a rubbing taken off a gravestone in the churchyard. You may know the practice. You lay the paper against the face of the stone and rub across it gently with the side of a graphite stick or a cake of black wax, and the carved letters come up pale against the dark. The name, the dates, the little lamb or willow or clasped hands, the whole face of the stone lifted onto the paper, so a worn inscription the eye can no longer make out is kept, a tender thing to do when you think of it, laying your hand against the face of the dead and carrying a little of them home. The collection had been made over many years by the Genealogy Club, a handful of women who across the decades had gone out into the yard in good weather with their paper and their wax and taken the face of every stone, so the writing on the soft old limestone, which weathers, the names going shallow and then gone in that pale rock, would be kept after the stone itself had given its letters back to the rain. Every stone. That was the club's whole pride, in a firm hand on the folder's own label, a complete record of all monuments and markers. Churchyard, transcribed and rubbed. Complete. So if there was a stone on my plot, and there had to be surely, if 9 lay there, surely across 67 years someone had set some marker, even a poor blank field stone, the club would have rubbed it, and the rubbing would be in the folder, and it would give me the name the book would not. I got the folder down late, the latest I had stayed, the square dark and the green lamp the only light. I untied the cotton tapes and went through it sheet by sheet. The rubbings were filed by section, the back wall at the very back as it was in the yard, and I went through the high-numbered paupers' stones, one soft sheet at a time. Poor little markers, a single name, a single date, the cheap thin stone of people who had had nothing, and many with no rubbing at all, only a slip noting no stone, ground only, which is the resting place of most of the poor and most of the yards of the world. And then I came to my plot and found that the club had been there because there were sheets for it, a whole sheaf, more sheets for that one plot than for any other in the folder, and every one of them was blank. Not empty paper. Each was a true rubbing. You could see the work in it. The wax laid down and dragged across, the whole face darkened in that close gray grain, the texture of stone come up under the rubbing hand, the little pits and the cool flat shape of a stone's face faithfully transferred, so that holding one to the lamp you could all but feel the cold of the rock. The club women had done their work. They had gone out to that plot more than once, more than twice, and laid their paper against whatever stood there and rubbed it carefully and well. And there were no letters, no name, no date, no little lamb or willow or clasped hands. Nothing. The whole grained gray face of a stone lifted onto paper again and again across the years, and not one mark a hand had ever made. Whatever stood on that plot against the wall, the club had rubbed it, and it had given up nothing because there was nothing on it to give. A blank stone, rubbed and rubbed and rubbed, and here is the small human thing I have never been able to get past. Each blank sheet was labeled in the corner in the firm hands of the club women, the date the rubbing was made and the initials of the one who made it. And the dates ran across the decades the way the burials had. I laid them out, of course I did, in a row by date, because that is the disease. One woman in 1949 going out to that plot, laying her paper against the blank stone, rubbing it, finding nothing, labeling the nothing, filing it. Another woman, or the same one older in 1957, going out again to the same blank stone, finding the same nothing, filing it again, and again in the 60s. Across 30 years and more, these careful women had gone out to that one plot, knowing, they must have known, they had the folder, they had read their own label, complete record of all monuments. Knowing the last one who tried had found nothing, and going anyway and finding nothing anyway, and keeping the nothing anyway in the one fat sheaf at the back of the folder, the most rubbed plot in the yard, and the only blank one. Each of them, I think, believed it a mistake. Surely the last girl did it wrong. Surely the stone is only worn and readable if I press a little harder. Surely there is a name here we have failed to lift. And each had failed, and filed her failure behind all the failures before it. They were keeping a record of a thing that would not be recorded. That is the only way I have ever found to say it. 3 things now. 3 honest records made by honest people, none of them ever laid beside the others until I laid them. A book that said 9, a map that said none, and a sheaf of rubbings that said something is here and it has no name, and it will not let us give it one. And not one of those people, the ministers, the sextons, the surveyor, the careful club women, ever held more than a single piece of it. It waited for a winter and an outsider and a long table and a green lamp. It waited, I have come to think, for exactly the kind of person who cannot let a column go unbalanced. It waited for me. I did try once to ask a living person, and it does not flatter me, but it is the truest thing in the whole story about how a thing like this gets kept. And the keeping is more frightening than the thing. A woman came to the society 2 afternoons a week, a volunteer, one of the genealogy club, old now, past going out to the yard with the paper and the wax. Her name does not matter, and I would not give it anyway. She was kind to me, and I will not have her named in a story like this. She was a town woman to her marrow. Her people, 4 generations in that ground, and she knew the yard the way a whole life of decorating graves and standing at burials knows it. In the body, not from the paper, she was exactly the person to ask. So one afternoon, careful, I asked. I did not say a word about books that said none or maps that said none. I said lightly that I had been cataloging the old rubbings and come across a plot at the back wall the club seemed to have rubbed many times, every rubbing blank. And wasn't that strange, all that work for a blank stone, and did she happen to know whose plot it was? What I saw was not what you are expecting, not pale, not a warning, not a lowered voice in a tale. She went for a moment still, the way the whole thing was still at its center, and came back with a small, brisk laugh and a wave of the hand and said, "Oh, that old ground, honey. There's nothing back there. That's just the stranger's end. Nobody's people are back there." Warmly, finally. The way you close a door you do not know you are closing. And she turned the talk to her grandmother's stone up on the good ground that wanted its lettering freshened, and the moment was over, and I let it be, because there was nothing in her to push against. That is the thing. She was not hiding it from me. She was not keeping a secret the way you keep a secret, with the knowledge of it sitting somewhere in you. She had been handed the stillness so long ago, so gently, so completely, that it had stopped being a thing she knew and become a thing she simply was. Nothing back there. Nobody's people. The stranger's end. She believed it the way you believe the ground is solid. And it had taken me 1 winter and 3 honest records to learn that the ground right there was the one place in that whole town that was not solid at all. I think about her more than about the minister, if you want the truth. The minister knew. I saw him know at the end. But the woman did not know. And the not knowing was the deeper thing, because it told me how the arrangement had lasted 67 years and longer, how it could last forever, how it is very likely lasting still. It did not last because cruel men kept a wicked secret. Cruel men die and their secrets get loose. At the deathbed, in the confessional, at the bottom of a bottle. Secrets are heavy, and the ones who carry them are always, in the end, looking for somewhere to set them down. This was not carried like a secret. It was carried like a manner, like an accent, like the side of the bed you sleep on, like 100 small certainties you have never once examined, because no one around you has either. Nothing back there. The town agreed on it the way it agreed. The church bell ran behind the courthouse clock. A plain fact about the place, not pleasant, not unpleasant, simply true, and not the kind of true you turn over. A thing carried that way does not get loose. There is no deathbed for it because no one knows they hold it. There is no bottom of the bottle because it weighs nothing. It just goes on, handed from a grandmother's wave to a granddaughter's, year over year, until the granddaughters run out. And even then, I think, it does not end. It goes quiet and waits in the ground, off the holy line, for the third week of some October, and the tired family that has driven a long way, and the kind old minister with the parish purse and the one place left. I did not ask anyone else. There was no one else to ask. The answer was not being kept from me by any one person I could find and press. It was being kept by the town, by the manner of the town, by the soft, total agreement of generations of decent people that there was nothing back there. You cannot press a manner. You cannot corner an agreement. You can only go quiet yourself and go back to your table and turn at last to the one thing left when the living will not say and the paper will not balance. You go and look at the ground itself. So I left the table once. I had been at it 2 months and never been to the churchyard, which will sound strange, that I could card the whole death of a town and never walk the ground, but it is true, and it is a true thing about people like me. We would rather have the paper than the place. The paper is safe. The paper holds still. But there came an afternoon, the third week of October, when I could not sit with the 3 records spread in their rows any longer, and I put my coat on properly, both cuffs down, and took a sheet of the Society's soft paper and a cake of the black wax, and walked the few streets to the church and around to the yard behind the low limestone wall. A plain old country churchyard, nothing fearful about it in the daylight. The leaves coming down, the good stones near the church, the lambs and willows and clasped stone hands, the ground sloping gently away to the back wall, the light thin and yellow, the first true cold in the air, the whole place as quiet as a held breath. I knew the yard. I had catalogued it. I went down through the sections I knew by their numbers, into the high pauper's ground at the cold end, and came to the wall, and found my plot. There was a stone on it, a real stone, a low, pale slab of the local limestone, set upright hard against the wall, leaning a little as old stones lean, not large and not fine, but a stone set by some hand, for some reason, on the one plot the survey called empty, and the book said held 9. I crouched in front of it in the cold and looked at its face. It was blank. Of course it was. I had a sheaf of 30 years of other people's blanks back on my table, but it is one thing to know a thing from the paper, and another to be crouched in the cold with your own eyes on it, and the stone was not weathered smooth. That was the explanation I had been saving. A soft old stone worn blank by the rain, its letters given back to the limestone the way that pale rock does. This stone was not worn. Its face was good and flat and whole, the chisel marks of its dressing still faintly at the edges, where the dresser had squared it. A stone made to be carved, ready to be carved, set up in that ground waiting for a name. And no name had ever come. 67 years, 9 souls, a stone made ready, and no one had ever cut a single letter into it, not a worn stone, an unanswered one. I did what I had come to do. I laid the soft paper against the cold, flat face and held it with one hand and rubbed the wax across with the other, gently, the whole face coming up under my hand in that close gray grain, the cold of the limestone coming up through the paper into my fingers. When I had done the whole of it, I lifted the sheet and turned it to the thin light. Nothing. The grain of the stone, the cool, flat shape of a thing made ready and never used. No letter, no mark, no name. I had made the newest. Blank. And I understood, the way you understand a thing in the body before the mind will say it, that I was holding the same nothing those women had held, and that I would take it back and label it with the date and my own initials and file it behind theirs, because what else does a person like me do? And that the only difference between us was that I had read the book and the map too, and so I was the only one across all those years who knew the nothing on my sheet was not nothing. It was 9. I was holding 9. I carried it back through the failing light held flat against my chest, and I did exactly what I knew I would. I dated it, the 3rd week of October, and put my initials in the corner and filed it in the fat sheath at the back of the folder behind all the others. The newest failure to record a thing that did not want to be recorded, and tied the tapes and went home in the dark and did not sleep. That winter I did not sleep well again. Not because I saw anything, nothing ever came for me. What kept me up was the arithmetic. I would lie in the dark of my rented room and do the sum again, the way you cannot help doing a sum that will not balance, and every time it came out to the same shape, and the shape would not let me go. 9 down, none on the map. A stone made ready and left blank, the 3rd week of October. And under it the thing the woman with the brisk warm wave had taught me without meaning to, that no one was lying, that it was all true, every honest record of it, and that the truth was the unbearable part, because a lie can be caught and undone, and a truth only sits there in the ground being true, whether anyone reads it or not. I went in anyway every dark morning and finished the work, because small true tasks done with the hands will hold a person up, and I have built a whole life on that. I do not know who they were, the 9, but I learned that winter that the town had ways of accounting for them, 3 that I could find, and I will give you all 3, the way they were given to me, out of the boxes and out of the one mouth that would speak to me, and you may keep whichever frightens you most, because I could never choose, and I have stopped trying. The first I found in the sexton's own hand. There was a day book, not the register, a separate private thing, the book a sexton keeps for his weather and his wages and his complaints, and in the back of it, in the cramped hand of a man who dug graves in that yard for 40 years, somewhere in the 1890s, were a few lines that were not weather and were not wages. I will not give them straight, because I have tried, and they do not want to be said straight. But the sense was this, that there was a debt on the town, an old one, older than the church, and that the plot at the wall was where the debt was paid, and that as long as it was paid, his word, paid, the town would be kept. Kept from what, he did not write. He wrote that he had paid it again that year in the proper week, and the town was safe another while, and the Lord would forgive him, because the Lord, he wrote, had set the price, and not him. A gravedigger's theology. A man who had spent his life putting the towns dead in the ground, deciding somewhere in himself that some of them were not dead, the town had lost, but dead the town had spent. It is one thing to find a system in a ledger. It is another to find, in a tired man's private hand, the belief that made the system holy to him. The second I found in the founding records, and this one goes all the way to the bottom of the town. I told you to hold on to the year on the monument. One noon I walked out and put my face up to the worn stone I had passed 100 times and read the year the town was founded and the names of the men who founded it. Then I dug out the founding deeds, because a society keeps those if it keeps anything, and read how the town came to be. And it was the oldest story there is in that country, and the one nobody carves on a monument. The land had been taken, not bought, whatever the deed pretended. Taken from the people who were on it before, in the hard years when that was simply done, and done here with more blood in it than the paper admits, on a date the town afterward chose to call its founding, and cut into stone and walk past forever after without reading. And there was a county history, the kind some local man writes in old age and no one reads, and in it, among the dull pages on the first mill and the first church, was a line I have never gotten loose from. He wrote that the town had been troubled from the start, that every so often across its whole life, in the fall of the year, there came a season of bad luck. The old people spoke of blow, a fever, a barn fire, a child gone off a wagon, a sound man hanged in a good year for no reason anyone could name, and that it had been so since the founding, and that the old people said the ground had never settled to having the town on it. The ground had never settled. He wrote it as a quaint thing, a bit of color, and went on to the first mill. But I had the burial book by then, and the dates, and I sat with the county history in one hand and my cards in the other, and did the thing I do, which is the arithmetic. And here is the arithmetic, and it is the worst sum I have ever worked. Count from the founding. 1828, the year carved on the stone I had passed 100 times, and add a span of about 26 years, and again down the whole length of the town's life. A generation, the old people would have called it. The years between a thing being done and the children of the ones who did it coming of age. Lay that beat against the heaviest of the 9, the surest ones, and they fall on it. Not the loose scatter of the lesser graves, but the beat. 1906, near enough. 1932, near enough. 1958, dead on. A slow tide coming in under the random chop of ordinary dying, and at every high mark of it, in the 3rd week of some October, the town carried something to the cold end of the yard, and paid the debt the grave digger believed in, and to the ground the founders wrong had cursed, if you believe the county history, if you believe the old people, if you believe any of it. The last hard turn of that tide was 1958, and I sat there in the cold and added 26 to 1958, the way you cannot stop yourself once you have seen the beat. And it came to 1984, and it was the winter I worked the sum, the autumn of 1984. The 3rd account is the one the town keeps in itself, the thinnest and oldest, and the one that frightens me most. It is in no book. It is the whispered thing, worn down across so many mouths that almost nothing is left of it. And I had only the one scrap from the one living person who would speak to me, the old woman who told me there was nothing back there. As she turned the talk away that afternoon, she said one more thing, lightly, the way you pass on an old saying of your grandmother's, half a joke, not meant, that her grandmother had always told the children to be sweet in the fall, to mind their manners in the fall, stay close to home, and not be the one that's noticed. Be sweet in the fall, so you're not the one that gets noticed. And she laughed and said, wasn't that a funny old thing? And went back to thinking about her grandmother's stone and was done with it. She never heard what she had said. She had been handed it as a child the way you are handed the rule about your coat, and kept it the way you keep a habit, with no idea on this earth that it was the last worn down corner of the only warning the town ever gave its children, passed mouth to mouth for 150 years until it meant nothing, and was, God help every one of them, still obeyed. 3 accounts then. A debt the gravedigger paid and believed in. A founding wrong the ground never settled to. A warning worn all the way down to be sweet in the fall. I cannot tell you which is true. Maybe none. Maybe a hard town only needs an empty plot and a habit of not asking, and the rest is the story frightened people hang on a habit to make it bearable, the way a town will build a whole man out of half a memory rather than face a hole with no reason in it. I have believed that too on the better nights, but it does not finally matter which you choose, because under all 3 runs the same arithmetic, and the arithmetic does not care what you believe, it only counts. And it had told me that winter that the debt was coming due again, in the fall, in 1984, which is why I have to take you back now to the yard and the open grave and the family at the lip of it and the old minister with his book, because by the time the leaves came down that year I'd finished my work, and I was standing in that churchyard on my last day in that town, and I watched the sum come true. You have been there the whole time in a way, because I left us there at the start. The churchyard, the leaves coming down, the low wall, the open grave in the cold corner, the family in their good dark clothes, the old minister, the woman by the boxes. It was my last day in that town. The work was done. The vault held its true order. The books were carded and the great folder tied tight. There was a museum up north with work for a person with a way with paper, and I had taken it because the money was running low, and because I wanted to be a long way from that yard before the leaves were all the way down. I had carried in the last box of church things that morning on my way to handing back the key, not knowing there was to be a burial. You do not always know. And I came around the end of the wall with the box in my arms and stopped, because there they were. The minister I have to be fair to, because what I am about to tell you, I am not certain he had any choice in, and I have never been certain. And the not being certain is its own kind of weight. An old man near the end of his service, quiet and courteous, who had been kind to me in the small ways of his kind across that winter, asking after my work, bringing me once a cup of coffee in the cold. The family I did not know. They were not town people. They had the look of people who have driven a long way for a hard reason and are tired in the particular way of the bereaved. I had heard the shape of it a week before when they first came to him. A death of someone distant to them, a great aunt, an old cousin, one of those relations who outlives everyone who knew her well and dies at last among people who are only dutiful. They had brought her back because this was where she had been born, generations gone, and wanted her laid in the old churchyard with what was left of her people. And there had been a difficulty. The good ground full these 50 years. No plot for her among her kin. And I had heard him tell them in his quiet, courteous voice that there was, as it happened, one place left. A plot at the cold end of the yard against the back wall. It had never been used, he said. It had stood empty all these years. They were welcome to it. It would cost them only the fee. It would be no trouble at all. So now I stood at the end of the wall with my box of papers, and there it all was, come true. They had dug the plot open. The dressed stone with no name on it stood propped to one side where the diggers had set it, and the cold, even breath of the limestone came up out of the open ground into the thin October light. And the family stood at the lip of it, grieving honestly for the tired, distant aunt they had driven so far to lay down. And not one of them knew they stood at the high mark of a tide that had been coming in 150 years, in the third week of the right October, near enough to 26 years to the season since the last one. The arithmetic had come true. It had put on its good dark clothes and driven a long way and was weeping now at the graveside, and it did not know that it was the arithmetic. That is the thing I want you to feel if you feel nothing else. They were not victims being led to a slaughter. They were a family burying an old woman who had outlived her people, doing the decent, dutiful thing, grateful to a kind minister who had found them a place when the good ground was full. The horror was not being done to them. The horror was that they were the hands it was being done with, and they would drive home after and never know it. And the woman they laid down would go into the off-the-map ground and become the 10th nothing in that plot, paid in the proper week. And the town would be kept another while from whatever it is kept from, and no living soul would ever say a word. And the minister knew, that is the part I have carried furthest. He looked up from his book, the way a man glances up in the middle of the words to gather his next sentence, and saw me at the end of the wall with my box of papers, the outsider, the paper woman, the one soul in the county who had read the book and the map and the rubbings and the gravedigger's daybook and the founding deeds, all of it in one mind across one winter. The one living person besides himself who knew what ground that family stood on, and what week it was, and what the week meant. And he knew that I knew. I watched it cross his old face, plain as cold crossing a hill, and behind it that thing I have never been able to name, not fear and not guilt, but something older and more tired than either. The look of a man handed a debt he never made and never understood and could not put down, who had just, for the first time in his long life, been seen carrying it by someone who could see the whole weight of it at once. We did not speak. Nothing was said, then or ever. I never spoke to him again. We only looked at each other across that open grave, over the bowed heads of the weeping family, for as long as it takes to draw one slow breath. And in that breath, the whole of it passed between us, that he knew, and I knew, and each of us knew, the other knew, and that neither of us would say one word, not to that family, not to anyone, not ever. He would finish the words and let them. Lower her and pay the fee himself, out of the parish purse, and sign nothing, the way it had always been paid and never signed. And I would set down my box and get in my car and drive north and say nothing to no one until now, until you, all these years too late to do, that woman or the 9 before her, the smallest good. He gave me at the end of that one breath the smallest motion of his head, not a nod, the ghost of one, the motion you make across a distance when there is an agreement between you that can never be spoken and is being kept. Then he looked back to his book and went on with the words, and I turned and carried my box back around the wall, and that was the last I saw of him, or of that town, or of the plot at the cold end of the yard that the map calls empty and that I know holds 10. I have had a long time to be ashamed of the driving north, and I will tell you honestly where I have come out, because it is not where I started, and it may not be where you would want me to be. For years I thought the sin was the silence, that a better woman would have done something, stood up at that graveside and said, "Stop," gone to a newspaper, dragged the daybook and the deeds and the 9 nameless lines into the light, and made the town look at what it walked past every day. There is a thing in us, in the good ones especially, that cannot bear to see a wrong and do nothing, that feels the not doing as guilt, that believes if you have once seen a thing, it has become yours to fix. I have felt that my whole life. I feel it still, telling you this. But I have come slowly to think it was a kind of vanity, because what was I going to fix? A debt 150 years old, demanded by a wrong done before my grandmother's grandmother drew breath, paid by a town that did not know its own hands were paying it, kept by a custom so deep the people keeping it could not see themselves do it. That was not mine. I did not make it. I could not unmake it. And screaming the truth at a family already breaking at a graveside would not have saved that aunt, or raised the 9, or settled that ground. It would only have torn the scab off a wound that was never going to heal, and was never in the end my wound to tear at. I was not the hero of that town's long, terrible story. I was not even a character in it. I came in at the very end with a way with paper, and read the whole of it for the first and only time in 150 years. And the reading was the thing that was mine to do, the only thing. Some debts are not yours to pay. Some wrongs are older than you and will outlast you, and are not yours to right. Sometimes you are given a thing only to see it, to be in all the long, blind life of a place, the one pair of eyes that finally understood. And the seeing is not nothing. The seeing is its own kind of duty, but it is a different duty than fixing. And the hardest thing I ever learned was to tell the two apart, and take up the one that was truly mine, and set the other down, and walk away from it without calling myself a coward for it. I saw it. To this day, I am the only one who ever saw all of it. And then I did the one small thing that was truly mine to do. In all those years, in all those 9 plain lines, there was exactly one name. I saved it for here, the way you save the one warm thing for the end of a cold telling. It was in the very first book, the oldest, in the schoolmaster's careful upright hand in 1889, 2 years before the first of the nameless ones, a burial in that same plot, the first burial in it, and it had a name. A woman's name, and her age, which was young, and her dates, and a small note of the kind a minister writes when he knew the soul he was burying. A stranger to the town, taken and sick off the road, and died among us. And we knew not her people, but she told us her name, and here it is. One name, the first, the only. As if, that first time, the town still meant to do it right. Took in a dying stranger, asked her name, was told it, wrote it down, meant to carve it on a good stone. And then something happened in the 2 years between her burial and the next that taught the town to stop asking, to set the stone and leave it blank and pay the fee and sign nothing and never speak of it again. I do not know what happened in those 2 years. It is in no record, but the first one had a name, and the 8 after her did not, and I have always thought the name was the thing they decided they could not afford after. So I copied it out. The last night in my own hand on a clean card, not a catalog card. The catalog had its dry one already, a card of my own for me. I copied her name, her young age, her dates, the schoolmaster's. Small note. Every word the book had kept of the one soul in that ground anyone had been willing to keep. And I put the card in my coat. I have it still. It is in a drawer not 10 feet from this chair, and I take it out sometimes in the 3rd week of October when the leaves come down and the light goes thin, and I read her name out loud once into the quiet, because she is the only one of them I can, and because a name kept is a small thing, but it is not nothing. They kept the ground off the map. They kept the stone blank. They kept the fee unsigned. The one thing that town refused to keep was the one thing that costs nothing and weighs nothing and is the whole of what we owe the dead, which is their names. And I have got one of them out. It is not 9, it is 1, but it is the one I could carry, and I carried it, and on the cold nights I say it. And now you have heard a name kept, even though you never heard the name, and that will have to be enough because it is all there is. Sleep now. I have the rest of it. I am good at the keeping, and you do not need to hold any of it past the closing of your eyes. Only this before you go. That was 1984. The autumn I stood at the wall and watched the sum come true. And I have never once stopped doing the arithmetic because you cannot once you have seen the beat. Add your 26 years to 1984 and you will find a fall not so far back. Add them again and you find one nearer still. And the ground is as patient as it ever was. And there is no reason to think the tide stopped coming, and just because the last woman who knew how to read it carried what she knew 300 miles away and grew old in a chair. It is still turning. It turned while you were not looking. It will turn again. And the worst of it, the thing I have never laid down, is that the ones it turns on will be exactly like that family at the lip of the grave. Decent, tired, grieving, grateful for a kindness, with no idea they are standing at the high mark of anything. The dark history is not somewhere else. It is the gray shape on the green you walk past twice a day and read as decoration. It is the saying your grandmother passed you about being sweet in the fall that you kept because you keep your grandmother's sayings and never once heard. It is all around you, carved shallow in stone nobody reads, and most of the time it is sleeping, and you will live your whole life beside it and never know. And that is a mercy. And I have just taken it from you, and I am sorry. So do the only thing there is to do. The thing I learned in that cold yard and have done every October since. Keep them close. I mean it as plainly as I can say it. Count them at the table. Call them in before the light is gone. Keep the ones you love nearer than you think you need to, and keep their names. Say them out loud while you have the breath, because a name is the one thing the ground cannot take, and the one thing a frightened town will always in the end refuse to keep. And it costs you nothing, and it is the whole of what we owe each other. I could not pay that town's debt. It was never mine to pay, but I carried one name out of it, and I say it, and now you have heard a name kept, even though you never heard the name, and that will have to be enough because it is everything I have. Good night. Be sweet in the fall, and keep them close.